All right, join us now on the Drive the Lane podcast. Nicole Auerbach from The Athletic, who covers all things and everything college football. You've definitely seen her name a lot the past year and this past season. Nicole, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So, we're going to talk a little bit about the playoff matchups, who we think is going to win and all that. But you've been very vocal and you've written some great stories about your thoughts on the playoff, the rankings, the committee, all that. So first off, would just love to hear, if you were doing the rankings yourself, who would those top 7 or 8 teams be?
Well, they would not be the same teams in the same order that the selection committee did. I mean, I think what was really frustrating this year is I don't ultimately have a problem with the top 4 teams, but I have a problem with basically 5 through 25 because I just think that they were not very consistent at all with logic and justifying things. Like typically in a normal year, they are better at kind of retroactively coming up with reasons to say why a certain team is in a certain spot. And they just didn't do that in any sort of believable way this year. And that's what was frustrating because, Cincinnati deserved a fairer shake and they didn't get it. And so the fact that they ended up being behind a 3-loss Florida team wasn't shocking after the way they'd been treated the previous weeks. But if I could have redone things, I would have had Cincinnati in a shot where they legitimately could have been in that conversation for the 4th spot. Like there's no reason that final conversation essentially had to come down to Notre Dame versus A&M. Why wasn't Cincinnati there? Right? Like it's about putting teams in spots that make things realistic or defensible. And so I would not have had Iowa State and Oklahoma where they were based on their losses. That happened, that the committee wrote off in certain ways. I would not have a 3-loss Florida team in the I wouldn't have, after the LSU game, they should have fallen out of at least the top 10, maybe top 15. That was not a good loss. That was a depleted LSU team, and there's just no way to spin that. So I would have given Indiana a better ranking. I would have given Coastal Carolina a better ranking. I would have given teams that seemed to not be getting any benefit of the doubt because of their names. I would give them the benefit of the doubt. And so, listen, I understand that it still would have been a long shot for Cincinnati to make the 14 playoff. But the fact that they weren't even close is what bothers me. So I would have set up in this scenario heading into championship weekend where they were at 5 or 6 and had a legitimate chance. And so that is still a conversation that can be had that final weekend.
I think one thing that is pretty glaring, and you kind of alluded to, is as long as there's going to be 4 teams in the playoff, it's going to come down to basically like a popularity contest in the sense of who the college football committee thinks everyone's going to like the most and who's going to watch the most, which can you blame them for that? Probably not. But is it fair? Also probably not. I know you have some thoughts and opinions in that sense. Would you care to dive into those?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you see how this happened and how it shook out, it became that question. Instead of actually having faith in this selection committee and this process to determine the right teams, understanding that it was challenging, understanding that this year in particular, you had teams that played totally different schedules, it undermined any trust that we had in the system because of decisions like this, because of the fact that Ohio State was always in the top 4. They could have, here's one small thing they could have done that would have instilled more faith in the process. They could have had Ohio State in the final set of rankings. They did not need to have them in the 4th spot the first set. They did not need to when they only played 4 games. You can put them at 5 or 6 and say, hey, we really like this team. We just want to see them do more. But when you do that right out of the gate, it signals to everyone that it does not matter how many games were played. And that the committee just liked that team. They were waiting for them to start and waiting for them to play. But you can still end up on December 20th with Ohio State in the playoff, but you don't have to do that the first time. And I think that's where you're like, oh, well, that's because it's Ohio State. It's because of the name on the jersey. It's because of the eyeballs that will, that they bring, right? And again, it's such a small thing because that set of ranking didn't matter. So all you had to do was do one thing that seemed more fair. Or don't put Cincinnati at 7 in that first one and then start letting them get leapfrogged by Iowa State, by, keeping Florida ahead of them, saying that they're not playing games when Ohio State also wasn't playing games during that stretch. Like, you could do little things to be more consistent that they didn't do. And so it ends up just building, and we honestly end up in a system and a place right now where I think we all kind of rolled our eyes a little bit at UCF for declaring themselves national champions. Like, I got a kick out of it. I think they annoyed a lot of people for sure. And now I think there's a lot of sympathy for what they did and what they went through. And there's a lot more sympathy for Coastal and Cincinnati fans, and also just people who are annoyed by the system. I don't think it helps either that Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State have been, so there's been 28 spots in the playoffs, 7 years, 4 spots a year. And those 3 teams have accounted for 16 of them. Like, I think there's a fatigue factor there too. But there's so much.
He has 3 of them also, right?
And Oklahoma's been in a bunch. It's the same teams. And so I think that fatigue factor plus, again, I think like everyone is more sympathetic to the plight of the little guy this year. It just kind of all converged at the same time with a bad selection committee, and everyone is just still really angry about this.
So something that we saw this year, and this has to do a little bit with rankings, a little bit with bowls, a little bit with matchups. The Coastal BYU game was one of the best games of the year, if not the best game of the year. Do you think, so I have a 2-part question. Do you think it's time to move on from the second best SEC team has to be in this bowl and the third best ACC team has to be in this bowl to get some better matchups? And then another matchup question. Do you think in the future there will be programs that leave an extra week open to potentially schedule a beneficial matchup for them?
So let's start with the second one, because I think that would be awesome. I don't know if people would do that. I think there are ways to do it if you get enough buy-in, or even like certain leagues do it, because you could also do it as like a SEC Big Ten challenge or something, right? Like, as long as enough teams, kind of do a TBD week. You could even decide who's going to play home games and who's not, or whatever, just for planning purposes. I just think that people are going to revert back to scheduling games 5-10 years out after this. Like, I really am going to be annoyed by that, but I think that's what's going to happen. So I would love to see that. And I think it was one of the best games of the season. It was one of the highlights of the season when I think back on the season as a whole. So I would like something like that to happen. I'm not super confident that it would. It would need to be incentivized. And right now, like, there's not a huge incentive for other teams to want to do that next year, because coaches are going to be annoyed. Like, they were, the GAs and these coaching staffs, we're dealing with changing opponents and prep on 3 days and all these things all season. I don't think that was that enjoyable for them. I don't think they would voluntarily do that, but you could still do it and set the matchups. Like, if it was a November weekend, you could set the matchups mid-October, whatever it was. So it's a doable thing. I would love to see it. I'm not super confident in it. As terms of like the bowls, it's really interesting, because I'm super curious to see if the fact that the Rose Bowl got moved and all of these teams opted out of bowls and had to cancel bowls, I wonder if any of that actually has a lasting impact on the postseason. Because I think, the Rose Bowl and like the stubbornness tied to it is part of the reason the playoff system exists the way it does, where the semifinals are not always on the same day. And it's because the Rose Bowl won't give up that slot. But if we go through this year, and honestly, it's fine playing that game in Dallas, does that change the way when they renegotiate? Like, do you need to have the Rose Bowl as part of it? Or do you, is the bowl system still going to be part of it? Then what about like these mid-tier, low-tier bowl games that players have been opting out of and now teams are opting out? Like, I wonder about the future of all of that. So I think it's possible that those types of things change. And then, again, like, there's bowls with traditional tie-ins to certain leagues because it's just always been that way and there's tradition. I wonder if that changes too.
So my last question before we move on to the actual playoff and the guts of it itself is, if you were named the commissioner of the college football committee, whatever the title is, the director, the head, the czar, whatever it is, if you were named that tomorrow, what would your first decision be? Would it, and I might be taking your answer by saying this, would you change it to 8 like the rest of the world wants it to be?
Yes. So we'll just call it a czar role, because I'm not even sure, like, executive director. I don't. You can't really do this stuff unilaterally. That's why all the
It's the czar of. I'm aware that it's the czar of college basketball, so it might as well be the czar of the college.
Yeah. So okay, you wave a magic wand. Yes, I go to an 8 or 16 team playoff.
Ooh, 8 or 16.
Yeah, I just think the more you can have play out on the field, the better. And I think part of the issues the sport has right now is that, again, we're talking about like the same 6 or 8 teams every single year, and we only view the sport through the playoff prism. So, you know, if Oregon loses to Auburn in week 1 and they were the best chance for a playoff team out of the Pac-12, we ignore the Pac-12. But if you go to 8 or 16, you go to a system where conference champions have a designated spot, that engages all of those fan bases the entire season. And that's part of the problem that's happening right now. And then also, if you do 8 or 16, but let's say it's 8, but there's a designated group of 5 spot, that engages a whole different level of the sport. Instead of, again, like everyone just being mad, there's like a real tangible benefit to, you know, staying engaged with that race. And also if you're in the American, you're keeping tabs on the Sun Belt, you're keeping tabs on Conference USA, right? So that's why I would do it in a heartbeat, because I think the regular season is really hurting from the current system. So that would be my magic wand.
I think that I look at everything from a college basketball lens. And the greatest thing about college basketball is that it has the greatest sporting event in all of sports, March Madness, the tournament. As much as college football can make the college football playoff like that in certain aspects, obviously, the better. Like exactly what you said, automatic bids for winning your conference. And then the idea of a true selection show where teams don't know if they're in or not. Like this year, we knew what the 4 teams were. There was no reason to have a selection show. They had 4 hours to talk about nothing. I mean, it's just like the more you can make it suspenseful and have teams like Clemson has a pizza party, but they know they're in, so who cares? But like I remember, I mean, every team, like the selection show is literally the most nerve-wracking, exciting, greatest thing in the world. And then you can make brackets and all this stuff, like as much as they can go to, whether it's 8, whether it's 16, to make it exciting, because it's not exciting. It's a formality right now, which we keep talking about, the better. I mean, like, just imagine seeing Coastal Carolina celebrating because they got the 8th seed in the playoff. Like, that is so cool, and it makes for Cinderellas. There's no Cinderellas in the college football playoff.
But then you're going to have 17th ranked Louisiana Lafayette declaring themselves the national champs.
No.
17th teams be upset. I'm just kidding.
No, I think
chance then.
Here's my, like, where I keep coming down on this. If Cincinnati or Coastal or someone was the 8th seed and they go and they play Alabama and they lose by 30, I'm fine with that.
It happens in college basketball every time too.
Well, it also happens with the team at Oklahoma.
Well,
Ohio State.
True.
We love Ohio State. They lost by 35 to Clemson 3 years.
Right. So I think even if you get to Alabama Clemson in the championship game, whatever inevitable matchup it is, it's more interesting on the way there. Maybe the semifinals are better than they are now because they've been so many blowouts, as you mentioned. And you know what? We watch the NCAA tournament when 1 seeds almost always beat 16 seeds every single year, because there's the off chance that one time the 16 seed will beat the 1. And you know what? I'd rather, if I'm Cincinnati, I'd rather know that and play it out on the field than just be told by the selection committee, we think that Florida is better than you.
Yeah, like, can you imagine how awesome it would be if an 8 seed was down 7 at halftime to 1 seed? Like, that would be just, I mean, that's a win. Like, it's a win for college football. Like, just, they need a chance. It's not fair to not every team in basketball gets a chance. Like,
let's get a 4 seed. Let's get a 4 seed down 7 at half this year to the 1 seed.
Seriously. I mean, the last 4 seed to do anything was Ohio State in the first year, right? I mean, it's crazy. It's just, there's so much wrong with it from my perspective. And granted, I look at it in a biased, like, college basketball lens, which I can't not do that. But, like, just copy them. Like, just copy them. Like, it works so well. Just copy them. I know it's not easy to do, but it seems like you'll earn more fans by doing that.
I think if you are already in the space, as they're in college sports together, and one has the best postseason out of any sports, and the other one has the worst, and you should take some tips. Yes, I agree.
If we're going to be exchanging tips, we should also have Adam Silver gets some PR tips to the NFL as well.
And John Mugar.
True.
But like to the point about how these semifinals have been so lopsided, what's the spread of Notre Dame and Alabama? Isn't it like
whatever it is? I was talking to my friends about this. I'm going to take like an alternate spread of like 35. Whatever alternate spread I can find that's high. It's like history repeats itself. It is going to be a blowout. And they already lost to Clemson by 100. They're just not they're good. They're just not great. But you got to throw a team in there.
Somebody had this theory, and I think it has some teeth to it. And this has been what has kept Ohio State out in multiple years, is you really shouldn't be able to be blown out and make the playoff. Because like at some point that means there's a clear separation between you and somebody. And especially in this case, that's why everyone thinks it's going to happen again. Because they saw full strength Death Star Clemson mode, and that was the blowout. And we're like, oh, Alabama also is in their Death Star mode. So like that's why people don't have faith in that being a competitive game. And meanwhile, first of all, the other semifinal is way more compelling, way more interesting. There's all this vitriol. Like, it's great. But it does suck that the storyline for the other semifinal is,
how much
how much are they going to lose by? Remember 2012. Like, that's literally, those are the two things that everyone's talking about.
Okay, I'm looking right now. I see minus 20 Alabama, which it seems like not. First of all, Clemson being -7 against Ohio State seems like it should be higher also. But then Alabama.
Wait, you mean 11th ranked Ohio State?
Yeah, exactly.
Listen, Dabo was at least consistent. He's been saying all that stuff publicly.
I guess
ways of saying it.
Let's jump into that. First, we should do Alabama Notre Dame real quick, a little round table about how much we each think Notre Dame's going to lose by, because obviously everyone who's listening to this, except for, we did touch on Indiana. I have some Indiana friends that are just so pissed about this, and we give our sympathies to those guys. But the majority of the listeners obviously are Ohio State fans, so we will get to the meat and potatoes of this episode, which will be a little bit of breakdown of that game. But first, I think Alabama's going to win by 37. What do you guys think?
I think it has the potential to get like that. My biggest issue with that matchup is 3 of these teams have shown they can be quick strike offenses. They can score in 12 seconds drives, right? Like, we were all watching SEC championship. We saw Florida score. We saw there was a minute left before the half, and you're like, that is way too much time. And it was, because Alabama can 2 plays touchdown drive.
Mm-hmm.
Clemson can do that. Ohio State can do that, especially if Chris Olave is back, right? Like, they can do those things. Notre Dame, that's just not how they're built. That's not how their offense runs. And so at some point, like, you're going to have to keep up in a game against Alabama and a game against Devontae Smith and Najee Harris. Like, I just don't know. I don't think that they have essentially, like, they don't have the horses to do it. But if they can, get some time off the clock and put together long drives, like, at least they're going to take away possessions or limit possessions for Alabama. But the issue is, it's just the way they're built. Like, the other 3 teams, to me, are built in similar enough ways where if it becomes a shootout, they can keep up, or at least they should, unless people are making mistakes. And Notre Dame doesn't do that. And it kind of sucks for Ian Book, because he really was playing great the back half of the season, and came against Clemson the first go around. Like, that was an Ian Book that I didn't know he was capable of being. The problem is, clearly that was a bit of a fluke in that game, because it was very obvious what Clemson is when they're at full strength, when they have guys like Tyler Davis and Skowski back defensively. So that's where there's just no faith that they can keep this interesting enough. Although I will say, I didn't necessarily think Notre Dame was going to win that game against Clemson the first time, even without Trevor Lawrence. I still was pretty confident in Clemson. So I've been proven wrong before, but at least in that case, you felt like that you had 2 teams on similar ground. And in this case, I just don't see it, unless, again, there's 3 Heisman finalists on this Alabama team for a reason.
Yeah, last year, and I don't really have much else to add about Bama Notre Dame, other than that Mike Golick Jr. might delete Twitter by the time the game happens if he sees any more from the 2012 game. But I last year thought it would be cool to pick Oklahoma over LSU and be the only guy that had that right. And I'm not going to make that mistake this year. So I'm with both of you that Bama dominates. It's over early. Maybe we see some flashes of stuff from Ian Book. But I said this with Perry the other day. It's tough to – when's the last time the national champion – besides Cardale Jones, and he even played in the NFL. When's the last time the national champion didn't play in the NFL? Your quarterback needs to be a legitimate NFL chance quarterback. Cardale Jones fizzled out, but he was drafted with the intention this guy's got a cannon. Let's see if we can turn him into a player. You really cannot win without a quarterback that looks like it can be a first, second, third round draft pick and play and win in the NFL, which you have in Lawrence, you have in Fields, and people are saying that about Mac Jones. So I think that's the difference, and Ian Book is great, but you kind of got to go I don't even know the last quarterback that, won a national championship and then didn't play in the NFL. If JT Barrett did it, that would have been your answer. But if he wins that national championship, maybe gets drafted, whatever, that's not here or there. But moving on to the Ohio State-Clemson game, normally we have a lot of bias. I'm having difficulty, coming here and saying – Ohio State's going to come out and win that game. If Olave's back, there's no one that can stop him. If they win the game, it's going to be 52-51.
I am really excited for this game. I think it's oddly, there's definitely some rivalry elements to this, because of the familiarity, how frequently they played the last few years, the way that last year's game ended, and how contentious it was with the controversial calls. And I think between the footage of Ryan Day in the locker room, the coaches poll vote, and just some of the Twitter, the jabbing, the back and forth, I like it. I am here for it. It was already going to be the much more interesting semifinal. But I think that leaning into this, is great. Part of what we love about college sports, in college football in particular, are petty rivalries and grudges that don't go away and weird trophies for these things. And so I think it's great for this sport, and I am here for it. And I think it's very interesting when you have two quarterbacks who've been so high profile in the sport for a few years. They were the faces of the, push to play this season. They're the ones everyone, wants to see where they fall on their draft boards. I think it's just really interesting. And there's also very, you want to go in the weeds on the differences between last year's teams, the way they, their personnel worked and different things versus this year. It's just an interesting chess match. And, you've got Ryan Day, you've got Brent Venables. It's just such a fascinating matchup. And then there is the uncertainty of not knowing exactly which Ohio State players will be available. Are they going to be will they have gone fully through the return to play and basically game ready shape? I mean, we've seen with college basketball with, coming out of protocol, it's hard. And so there's a lot of unknowns in that area as well. And it's kind of strange because this is obviously in a unique year. They had to push back selection day to get in more regular season games. And it's the shortest turnaround now to the semifinal. So it's less than 2 weeks. And we're in an era where you actually need those days for these COVID protocols. So it's obviously the Big Ten tweaked their protocol, but it's still, there's definitely still a little bit uncertainty, which kind of adds a layer too, because obviously having or not having a Chris Olave makes a big difference.
So Nicole, this is kind of just a general question for you. We're recording this, a little over a week before the games. Have you run into issues this year where you say something and obviously on our show, it's not as big of a deal if you say it on national radio, but where you say something and then, knock on wood, the starting quarterback 3 days later gets, is out for COVID and everything you've said all week kind of just goes out the door?
Yes, which is why I always remind people, which we have not done yet, but we are recording this on Wednesday, December 23rd. It's 7:30 Eastern, because this was what happened in the summer into the fall. Things were changing so fast that you knew that you could definitely say things that were outdated. I did multiple radio shows when we thought Nick Saban actually had COVID and it was the false positive, right? And so, you know, we're like, oh, he's definitely not going to be on the sideline. They keep trying to get him to be there. And then, you know, the SEC had the way to test out of it and figure out if it was a false positive, right? And so it's just been one of those years where everything changes, although we do know that Trevor Lawrence has already had COVID, so you have that element. So there's certain people you can rule out for, you know, kind of throwing a major wrench into things. But yeah, it's been incredibly hard to predict. I've actually had so many questions about how people have even attempted to gamble on these games, not knowing availability and how people are going to look. I mean, again, I have a lot of friends who bet on these games, and I would say, like, you've got more of a problem if you're doing it during this, but I understand that, like, habits are hard to break, but, like, I would not trust myself putting any money on any game this year in anything.
Good thing we don't gamble. We
definitely didn't lose money on the Ohio State spread and Trey Sermon not getting in at the end.
Well, again, yeah, because it's, you know, you really never know. I mean, I got so mad at Lance Leopold for not keeping Jarrett Patterson in the game when he was about to break the single game rushing records and touchdown records. And I can only imagine, like, actually the level of anger I felt about that clearly is how people feel when they lose money on stuff and they get really mad at, like, end of game decisions. And I'm still livid, and I'm going to hold this against this coach forever. And I didn't have any money on that game.
You think you were more or less mad than, for some reason, some people are about Sarah Fuller getting to kick in a game?
No, those people are really mad. Like, they're like, I'm still confused about it because I'm not sure how it affects their lives. Like, I don't understand how it hurts anyone, truly. But I am glad that, you know, a lot of these men learned about squib kicks, how hard they are, how you kind of direct them to certain spots on the field, and then also how extra points, which they said were really easy, are actually kind of hard, as we've seen even professional kickers struggle with shorter kicks, and other college kickers struggle with extra points. So I do think that there has been a lot of special teams education this season.
Yeah, I know you guys have both seen the videos of people who were mad at the Bears kickers for missing those kicks. And then they brought people off the street who tweeted, like, I could have made that kick, and they kicked them, and they literally are, like, missing the ball. I'm not going to sit here and think that I could be a college kicker right now. Like,
I would never want to be either.
That too.
I mean, this was a new case, but usually you only ever get in the spotlight for doing something bad.
Oh yeah.
She actually did her job what they asked her to do, and people got mad, but, like, it's like being a ref. Like, you literally, you don't want anyone to talk about you.
It's an offensive tackle. The offensive tackle is the best one, because the announcers aren't going to say, wow, that was an unbelievable block, right? Like, no, they'll say, oh, this guy messed up, and that's why they have the sack.
Also,
there's very few jobs in sports that are mostly praise and no negative attention.
Defensive end, though, on the flip side, when has anyone said, oh, wow, this defensive end has not been no, he sacked him, and now everyone's like, oh, this is why.
Yeah, one time in, like, 2 games, and it's great. Yeah. See, that's the percentages that I'm interested in. Like, do very little, minimal impact, even though you're doing stuff on every play, but only getting praised. I respect that.
The thing I found funniest about the Sarah Fuller, and it's weird to say situation, because it's not a situation, it's just like a moment. People were acting like she marched into Vandy Athletics and was like, you put me on the damn football team right now and give me an opportunity to kick, or I swear to God, there's going to be problems. Like, they were like, we don't have a kicker. We need someone.
He was like, hi, I will help you.
Right.
You don't have a men's soccer team.
It would be like
no other options.
Getting mad at someone bringing food to, like, a homeless shelter and saying you didn't bring enough. Like, you only brought enough for every single person to eat twice.
No, or it would be like, again, bringing food to a homeless shelter, and then someone being like, well, why didn't you bring Italian? Why did you bring tacos?
We really wanted McDonald's, please.
Yeah, like it doesn't make sense. And that was, I mean, obviously people were being purposely obtuse with all of that. But yeah, I mean, she was helping. They had no other options. Like, I talked to their special teams coach about it. Like, they tried people out on the team. If one of you guys raised your hand, like a normal kid on campus, like, I'll help, I can kick, I played soccer or whatever, would that not be the greatest story in college football that week?
I kicked a 40-yard field goal in high school once in gym class.
There you go. See?
So throw me out there.
And
that's my own fault, except for I think I've exhausted my eligibility. So that's the underlying story is that Sarah Fuller first had to dodge me not having eligibility, and that's why she should be praised even more. But
this is true.
That's just another.
Why didn't they just get someone from the Vandy soccer team? Oh, if you looked for more than 1 second, you would see Vandy doesn't have a men's soccer team, so that's why they didn't take anyone from the men's soccer team.
Yes, but why Google that when you can just tweet it?
Yeah, why wouldn't you just tweet it? Exactly.
All right, but we got to get back. Nicole, I want to hear briefly, if Ohio State wants to win this game, okay, you're drawing up the perfect game plan. You know a ton about Clemson. You know a ton about Ohio State. How can Ohio State win this game? Tell our fans, tell the Ohio State fans and our listeners straight from the source, how can they win this game?
Okay, well, so a couple of things that I think are interesting about this Clemson team is there was a lot of turnover on the offensive line. So I think you've got to obviously apply pressure. Trevor's been a pro. He's been NFL ready since he was a freshman, right? He does not get rattled. But one thing that was really interesting in the Notre Dame game the first time was they basically took Travis Etienne and the run game out of the picture. And that doesn't usually happen. And then, again, it's such a luxury to have a guy like Travis Etienne because they've gotten more intentional with him in the passing game. So he is never going to get fully taken out of the game. But I do think you have to try to make them one-dimensional if you can. And in the passing game, it's also changed is they don't have T. Higgins, and Justin Ross has been out all year with an injury. So they don't really have like that guy that they will just throw 50-50 balls to. They are a little bit more, and again, Trevor's as accurate as ever. Like, it's not like they're not having big passing plays, but it's a little bit different where like sometimes you could just do that and those guys are going to come down with it because they're basically basketball players. That's a little bit different. So I think you pick your poison, and I think you probably at least try to take Etienne out of the game on the ground. I think you again, you're trying to put pressure on, some of these first year starters on the offensive line. And then defensively, they've had to pressure opposing teams in different ways because it's not like they had those, these defensive linemen that were just monsters in there forever. Right. And so like Tyler Davis is going to be one of those guys. He's the real deal. But like, I just think they're a little bit younger, a little bit greener. So they're doing a little bit different looks, different, kind of adjustments in a game. I mean, Brent Venables is a wizard, and we know that, but it's just different than the way they were doing it last year. And like James Skalski is their most important defensive player when obviously Isaiah Simmons was last year, and he was kind of just him against Ohio State. And if they had had two of him, they the game would have gone very different. So it's just like different tweaks and different opportunities. But I mean, they're so hard to beat. I keep thinking back, which I guess was technically earlier this year, was LSU Clemson championship game. And for a half, or at least a quarter plus, like it felt like they could do it. But you had a relentless offense, in Burrow. He had all the weapons around him. And Burrow played his worst half in that first half, and then he was typical Joe Burrow in the second half. So it's almost like, Fields needs to play a lot better than he has in the two biggest games that Ohio State's had. Like he really, really does, because Trevor's not going to make mistakes. And like I said earlier about the first game, I worry about the teams that are going to have to keep pace scoring in these games. And I think that pressure is going to fall obviously on Notre Dame. And I think that pressure is going to fall on Ohio State as well, just because we've seen some of these games, like the Northwestern game, took a while to realize you should just be getting the ball to Trey Sermon, right? And again, even in Indiana, like Justin wasn't the best quarterback on the field. So it's, he needs to be better. He needs to make decisions faster. He needs to, be more accurate. But they also need to keep pace because just Clemson, when they reach this time of year, they're so hard to beat. And it literally took one of the best offenses that college football has ever seen to actually beat Trevor Lawrence. That's still his only loss in college.
Crazy. Doesn't lose.
Yeah, he's a monster. My entire family is in mourning because they're Jets fans. They're so mad about that win.
That's the epitome. That's just terrible. But anyway, final piece of this game. Obviously, the only thing we're lacking is a prediction. I don't know
if I have one yet.
Yeah, well,
kind of like marinate on it.
You have to give us one. So,
well, what did you guys make your formal predictions?
No, but we will for this episode when we recorded it.
Well, if you want, I can text you Sunday when we're recording and say what's your prediction. Or
I would like to marinate a few more days.
Well, it'd be fun to give an initial prediction right now.
Well, I think my initial prediction is Clemson winning. I absolutely think this is going to be a tight game. But I will give you a score prediction on Sunday, unless I totally change my mind. But I think I don't know. I love Trevor Lawrence. I think he's phenomenal. I think he and Travis Etienne. When Travis Etienne decided to come back, it was unfair. Like to have him back. The fact that Trevor had to come back to college, couldn't go pro sooner. It's just kind of like an unfair talent on this roster situation. And like I said, I just worry about Justin Fields and which Justin Fields shows up. I know what Trevor Lawrence is showing up. So I'm definitely going to give you a Clemson winning prediction, but I do not know how or what score. So I will text you.
People are going to be mad. You were the reason college football was canceled to begin with, and now you're picking against Ohio State.
But, Ohio State people think that I don't like them anyway. So it's consistent. No, I mean, listen, I think this is going to be a great game. Like, again, we have not had that many great games in the semifinals. Last year's game is probably one of the very few. And I think I'm really glad we're not getting Clemson Notre Dame for a third time. I'm really glad that this is the matchup. I think, I don't know. Would you guys have rather matched up with Alabama or Clemson?
Neither.
Okay. Well, of the two.
Probably Clemson because winning the semifinal game accomplishes more than if they beat Alabama in the semifinal game. With the little rivalry that's been built in the drama.
Yeah, I want to just punch Dabo in the face. So
I saw somebody tweeted how they were a Michigan fan, and they tweeted that like what was bothering them so much was that Alabama was the most likable team in the playoffs this year, and I think it's true. But yeah, no, I mean, listen, I feel like Ohio State fans should be happy. I mean, first of all, the committee liked you so much, you were in no matter what. Like we got to count for something. Cause like this, in a different team, a different league or whatever, you don't get that benefit of the doubt. So to me, it's a little bit like, you accomplished what you set out to accomplish, which was to get to this. This is why they push so hard. And this is the thing that I've tried to explain to fans, but everyone was very heated and angry for many months of the summer. But the difference with we want to play, we want to have a season, and we want to play now, we need to play in the fall, is about this particular team wanting a chance at a national championship. Because you, like Justin Fields and everyone who wanted to play, if you played a season, it would have seemed really dumb to start a season in January or whatever. But if they had done that, they would have been playing. They would have had their opportunity to play and all of that. But they wanted to play on the same calendar as everybody else and have a chance for the playoff, and they got that. So I just think that is a successful season. What Ohio State has done to get to this position is successful. But I just worry about the Justin Fields that showed up against Northwestern showing up against Clemson.
I think you have a right to think that.
But hey, they actually realized they should just hand the ball off to Trey Sermon, and that was clearly a great decision. So maybe you can do more of that.
All right, Joe, should we wrap it up how we always wrap it up?
Yeah, Nicole, usually, and by usually I mean always, we end the show by opening the floor up to our guest. And we would like to give you the opportunity to ask us any questions that you've been dying to ask us throughout this interview, whether it's related to college football or related to our favorite gas station items. You can ask whatever you'd like. This is the spotlight is on you.
You both have been to Wawa's, correct?
I have, yes.
I have not.
Ridiculous. All right.
I don't even know what it is.
Why did I agree to come on this podcast?
You don't know what Wawa is, Andrew? Actually,
Wawa.
It's a cult-like obsession.
Yeah,
I was gonna ask the Wawa versus Sheetz question, but now, I mean,
I've never been to Sheetz, so
I think there's a clear difference. Wawa's clearly superior, but I'm extremely concerned. And again, I would have reconsidered this podcast invitation had I known that Andrew has never been to Wawa.
I don't even know what it is. What is it?
It's like an upscale. This is gonna offend you, but it's like an upscale. The best way to describe it is it's like an upscale 7-Eleven.
I think that's appropriate description. Sometimes
It's like a gas station on steroids.
and they're not all attached to gas stations. The one in my
Right.
town growing up wasn't, but a lot of them are. They have
It's an
great
East Coast thing also.
hoagies and Hoagie Fest. They're in New Jersey,
A
Pennsylvania,
hoagie is a sandwich, Andrew.
Maryland.
Is.
They're also randomly in Florida now, which is
I've been to one in Florida, one in DC.
Mhm.
I've never been to one.
Anyway, it's the greatest place on earth. So I was going to ask the Wawa Sheets question, and now I'm just as speechless. I've got nothing else.
I apologize.
Way to go, Andrew.
I apologize. I feel like an idiot. We should have prepped you that we were going to be asking you questions. Then in return, you should have prepped us with what that question was. So it's my fault.
No, it's actually your fault for never going to a Wawa. But that's
Don't deflect any of the blame. It's just
I'm
you
taking the blame. I gotta go.
the Wawa.
good. You should.
I gotta go. All right. Well, Nicole, we thank you for joining us. We will make sure that we roast you if your predictions are wrong.
Yes.
And we will praise you if your predictions are right.
Okay, I accept those terms of the deal.
All right. Thanks, Nicole.
Thanks, Nicole.
Yep. Thanks for having me.